So get the human working with the AI. Use the best of the people with the AI. And bear in mind that when it all comes crashing down, there isn't a piece of technology in the world that will get your systems back up and running. And so don't forget the role that people have to play. So look after the people, make sure that they understand the important role that they have, because I think all too often we talk about them being the weakest link. Actually, they're the strongest link. I'm not aware of any single breach anywhere in the world where systems have gone down and everybody has sat back and said, oh, well, don't worry about it. Technology will fix it. I'll go and have a cup of tea and I'll come back and it will be back up and running. Doesn't work that way.
You're listening to the ISF podcast for your organization's better cybersecurity. Your host, ISF CEO Steve Durbin, is an expert in leadership, business culture transformation, and cyber strategies for today's top enterprises. I'm producer Tavia Gilbert. In last week's episode, we heard the first part of Steve's recent feature interview for The European with veteran journalist Julie MacDonald. Today, Steve and Julie discuss scenario planning, transparency within industries, and what good leadership looks like in this complex moment in global history.
When we get into the more complex areas of cybersecurity and we think of scenario planning, predicting and preventing, how are large organizations, I mean, you support some of the largest, most successful organizations in the world. So how are they going about doing this? And can those kind of ways of planning be reproduced at smaller scale?
Yes, they can, is the good news. So how do they go about doing it? Well, probably the most popular service that we've been providing over the last, I would say, 18 to 24 months has been cyber simulation exercises, where we do take certain scenarios and we start in the boardroom. So again, it's all about that alignment from the top of the company. So we start in the boardroom, we run the exercise for the board. It isn't about simply doing tabletops. It is live. We do throw different things at individuals that they have to respond to. And then we go down from there. So typically in an organization, we'll be running a number of these, board level, senior leadership, and then down into middle management amongst employees as well. And it's all about taking those learnings and doing something constructive with it. So yes, of course, you're testing the business continuity planning element of things, but you're also unpicking how good certain individuals might be in a moment when you're probably going to depend on them. And you'll also highlight those that perhaps aren't quite as good. So you're throwing up, training needs, training opportunities. And I think that certainly the feedback we've had from all of the members that we've been doing this work with is that it goes so far beyond what they had anticipated or expected, because everybody's used to this tabletop stuff. And that, I think, is obviously good. The other element of it, which I like particularly, is they tell me it's fun. And it has to be fun.
Yes.
Because if it's fun, you remember it. And I think we need to bring a bit more fun back into work because it's got dreadfully dull.
It's interesting that you mentioned the word fun, and we've talked a lot about the human-centered part of work, about cybersecurity. I'm going to jump from that straight into AI, which has its roots in human capabilities, but it is becoming commonplace in every workplace or in a lot of workplaces, but it brings with it deep risks and complexities. How do you see the AI era, let's say in the short term, developing, and how proactively are organizations getting ready for it?
Yeah, I mean, AI, it's not new. I think that's the first thing that I always say to people. Machine learning has been around for quite some while. What has happened is that it's become very much more prevalent and in your face, if you like. AI depends on data. Data integrity is hugely important. AI is getting better at being able to spot data problems. But if you've got good data, that's really where you need to be starting with AI. And there are a lot of our member organizations that have done some pretty impressive things with that, not just in the security space, but outside of that as well, in the whole sort of predictive area. I'm thinking about retailers, consumer-based organizations, banks, because they can be used from a threat intelligence perspective as well. But again, the organizations for me that are really getting it right have not seen AI as this big solution. What they've seen it as is a tool. So again, AI is good at doing certain things. People are good at doing other things, the creative element of it. Yes, AI can produce paintings and pictures and write books, but it's not quite the same. And you can usually spot it. And it's the same in a work environment. AI is very good at spotting things that are abnormal. So let's use it to do that, because nobody wants to be sitting there looking at all of these network scans and what have you. That's, completely dull. So get the human working with the AI. Use the best of the people with the AI. And bear in mind that when it all comes crashing down, there isn't a piece of technology in the world that will get your systems back up and running. And so don't forget the role that people have to play. So look after the people. Make sure that they understand the important role that they have, because I think all too often we talk about them being the weakest link. Actually, they're the strongest link. I'm not aware of any single breach anywhere in the world where systems have gone down and everybody has sat back and said, oh, well, don't worry about it. Technology will fix it. I'll go and have a cup of tea and I'll come back and it will be back up and running. Doesn't work that way. And I think there is a tendency with AI to just forget that it is just a bit of technology. It is just a tool. And, people are still the key component in all of this, making it work.
It has a job to do, but it's not the whole dish, is what I'm hearing from you. I want to talk now about geopolitics. I mean, this is an incredible period in time that we're holding our conversation here. Incredible year for democracy. But it also means that markets are in flux. The threats and vulnerabilities are changing day to day. How are organizations preparing themselves for that? Because I think this is a period that we haven't seen before, certainly in terms of markets anyway.
No, that's true. There's a tremendous amount of change. And as we know, markets hate change. Businesses hate change. Some people take advantage of that and obviously, come out as winners. But as a rule, we would rather be able to predict the future just a little bit. And it's difficult to do that. So what are organizations doing? Well, certainly if I look at the ISF, look at our members, they're certainly communicating more amongst themselves. We have this closed environment, as you know. So members are sharing issues that they're concerned about, getting input from other members in different parts of the world. How are the things being dealt with, perhaps, in the Nordics?
If you had to say what the areas of strategy are that they're most concerned about, how would you sum them up right now?
I think certainly, again, depends on the industry, but advanced threats. We are seeing an uptick in nation-state-backed threat. Obviously, if you mention the geopolitical situation from an election standpoint, election tampering, that's a big concern. But our members certainly are very conscious that with all of that going on, they still have to focus on what it is that they do. Our members are banks, and they're equally retailers, and they're equally small organizations that are in the manufacturing space, for instance. So it's a very, very wide spectrum. And they're all concerned about preserving integrity of data. They're all concerned about how they might get back up and running when something happens, because it is a case of when. It's never a case of if, it's always when. And doing all of that when they've got people like me who are pushing them to continue to grow, to continue to expand, to do things differently, to be more agile, to be more, expansive in what they're up to. So it's tricky.
Protecting supply chains is another spicy area, isn't it? We've seen, obviously, over the last year and a half, with the situation in Ukraine as it developed, we've been able to see in real time vulnerabilities across the world, COVID as well, in supply chains playing out. Has that strengthened the understanding around vulnerabilities in supply chain, or are we still only at the beginning of that conversation?
I think it has. I think that if you look at the supply chain, the way that I think organizations used to assess the vulnerability of supply chains was by categorizing them, your tier ones, your tier twos, your tier threes. What COVID did for us was prevent the ability to actually go on site and do some of that assessment work. So people then had to fall back on technology. And the understanding that you need to have other options, I think, is now very prevalent amongst most organizations. So they may well have got a bigger pool of suppliers because you don't actually know, and certainly the Russian invasion of the Ukraine really brought this one home. You don't know when your suppliers may no longer be available for a variety of different reasons. And so that's really accentuated that. And one of the things that, from an ISF perspective, that we've seen is our members making very much more use of our supplier assessment tools, because it does give them the ability to tailor that to a very specific supplier without having to send out these pretty endless questionnaires that are inundating and frankly stifling most organizations. You can be doing business with 5 organizations. You'll get 5 heavy-duty questionnaires to complete, all asking similar questions, and yet nobody is collaborating to try to ease the burden. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to do that through our supplier assessment tool, which again is all about trying to make things easy for both parties. Of course, I'm not going to suggest for 1 minute that you don't do proper due diligence. Of course you do. But let's try and make it a little bit easier and share some of those things, because it's a never-ending process. I could assess you today and tomorrow something will have changed. So again, it's about thinking about what makes most sense. We're back to risk, which is where we started, and doing sensible things on a sensible basis, but trying to make life easy as well.
When we think about the ISF and collaborations that you have, connections, relationships with governments and regulators and so on, how important do you see those relationships being going forward in supporting your members?
I think they will always be important for us. I mean, we've been doing it for 30 odd years. So I think one of the basic premises of the ISF was always about, how do we help people like ISO, for instance, or how do we work with governments in different countries through their national organisations, the NCSC or NIST, I've mentioned as well. So I think that has to continue. I think that we are somewhat uniquely positioned because we are not aligned with any organisation, whether it be a vendor organisation, whether it be a government organisation. We don't lobby, for instance. So we're there to provide just objective information and to share that. And we tend to pull all of that together into this thing that we have called our standard of good practice, which provides our members with the ability to understand better what some of the regulatory or government-based requirements might be in certain countries and link that back to the policies that they're trying to put in place. And then that flows through into all of the tools and research that we do as well. So our job is to try to make life easy. That's what we're there to do. And I think that that means it's quite a difficult job.
I was going to say, making complexity easy. I want to conclude by talking about leadership. You're the leader in your organisation in very complex times, and you're also helping to support leaders in organisations in complex times. What should a leader's key priorities be? Where should their strategic focus be? When we think about risk and security right now, where does that begin?
Yeah. I think, again, I would probably go back to COVID because I think that was a really good rehearsal for the future, for where we are today. So what I mean by that is you very often need an event to shine a light on something that you need to do. So what happened during that? Well, I think about it from an ISF standpoint. Our primary objective was making sure that our people were safe and still had jobs. I think that is the responsibility of any leader in an organisation. We then just make sure that our stakeholders and shareholders also are getting what they needed. And I'd include customers in that because the ISF is somewhat unique in that our members are also our customers, are also our shareholders. And I think you have to focus on those two things. Then you have to preserve the organisation going forward because that's what continues to provide livelihoods for your people, what continues to provide product and services to your customers. And you focus on all of those. And then you come to the what-if situation. Then you begin to look at risk. And for me, you have to look at... The risk landscape has become so complex, you cannot possibly hope to cover off all eventualities. So you have to focus on the crown jewels. That's your starting point. Very often people will say to me, well, how much should we be spending? And my answer to that is it depends. It depends on your risk profile. It depends how nervous you are. It depends if you're going to enter new markets. It depends if you're coming out of markets. So you have to, as the leader of an organisation, I think, juggle all of those things. And you have to do it in a very sort of swan-like way.
While remaining flexible in your mindset, running your business at the same time. I mean, that's an incredible workload, isn't it, for a progressive CEO these days to deal with all of that?
It is. And I think, that you also have to accept that you're going to get it wrong. And when I talk to other CEOs, some of them are a little bit concerned about that. But you're going to make mistakes. So for as long as you're afraid of making those mistakes, you're never going to be giving your best. You have to give yourself the freedom, surround yourself with the right advisors, particularly when it comes to risk, of course. But recognize that you're not perfect. You will make mistakes. And the mistake itself isn't important. What is important is how you recover from that and how you learn from it going forward and how you share that with other people in your organization, and how you become very much more agile to take advantage of some of the opportunities that might open up. So I think it is a difficult job, but it's a job like all the rest, and you need to make sure that you can enjoy it, have fun with it, and do something that's a bit different.
I've written down here 2 P's and 2 E's: predict, prevent, evolve, and embrace.
Yeah.
Which I think sums up a lot of our conversation. Steve, thank you so much. I'm always fascinated talking to you as the shifting sands of geopolitics, AI, data, everything changes. So thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure.
Our thanks to journalist Julie MacDonald and to The European. Over the next few weeks, we'll be bringing you summer listening episodes, highlighting some of our favorite interviews with past guests. But we'll be back with a new season at the end of the summer, starting with Steve and me in a discussion about the threat horizon. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and we'd be pleased if you'd consider sharing the episode. To become a member, get in touch with Steve directly at steve.durbin@securityforum.org or on LinkedIn at Steve Durbin. Check out all our media and resources. All of it is there to support you at securityforum.org. Don't miss the ISF Analyst Insight podcast, sharing conversations with members about the real-world applications of ISF research. The ISF podcast is produced by TalkBox Productions and Tavia Gilbert. Thanks for listening.